Once, there was a man who always said yes. This man's name was Tony. Ever since Tony was a child, he said yes to everything. When Tony's father asked if he wanted salmon for supper, Tony said yes. Actually, Tony hated salmon, but he'd said yes to it, so he had to eat it. When his friends asked if he wanted to play football with them, Tony said yes. Actually, Tony hated football, and he often hurt himself playing it. But he'd said yes, so he had to play football. When his teacher asked him if he wanted to give a speech in front of the class, Tony said yes. The teacher was very surprised. Almost all kids said no. But Tony said yes, so every week Tony had to give a speech in front of the class. And all the other kids made fun of him in the playground for it. Things didn't get better as an adult. In fact, things got worse. The kinds of things people ask you as an adult are far more important than when you're a child. When Tony's friend Miranda asked him if he wanted to go to Kazakhstan with her, Tony said yes. First of all, Tony didn't like Miranda. She was a bad friend. She spent most of the time complaining about her horrible boyfriends, and she only did what she wanted to do. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that Tony was allergic to horses, and Miranda had planned an entire holiday of horse riding. When they got to Kazakhstan, and Miranda asked if he wanted to go horse riding, Tony could only say yes. And that was how he ended up in a Kazakh hospital. Covered in red spots and unable to breathe. Miranda stayed by his bed for a day, but then she got bored and went off to ride horses without him. Sure, she visited him every other day, and brought him sweets and souvenirs, but he spent most of the time lying in bed, watching bad Kazakh soap operas on the TV. At least Tony could have interesting conversations with the nurses. See, Tony was a doctor, and he was curious about healthcare in other countries. He wanted to know what it was like to be a doctor or a nurse in Kazakhstan. Before coming to Kazakhstan, Tony had thought that the healthcare there was very simple. But actually, this hospital was very good at treating allergies, especially horse allergies. Ever since I was a child, I wanted to treat horse allergies, said Dr. Khan. Dr. Khan was the lead doctor at the hospital. I dreamed about horses. And I dreamed about horse allergies. How lovely, said Tony. One of our presidents died from a horse allergy, continued the doctor. So, it's serious work for me. Now we are the #1 hospital in the world for treating horse allergies. Thank you, Dr. Khan, said Tony. You clearly love your work. Don't you? You're a doctor as well, aren't you? But Tony didn't love his work. He'd never wanted to be a doctor. When he was a child, he had a conversation with his father that went like this. What do you want to be when you grow up, son? I don't know, Dad. Do you want to make lots of money, son? Yes, Dad. Ah, well. There are lots of options for that, but not all of them are good. Do you want to do a good job, son? A job that helps people? Yes, Dad. Well, then. I guess that only leaves one option, a doctor. What do you think? You want to become a doctor? Yes, Dad. Actually, Tony was squeamish. He was terribly squeamish. He was squeamish about blood, bones and organs. He was squeamish about cutting his nails. He was squeamish about raw meat. So being a doctor was a terrible choice for him. It was lucky that his father hadn't asked if he wanted to be a surgeon. But Tony got over his squeamishness. When he started studying medicine, he fainted almost every day. The other students and teachers found it funny. They called him Fainting Tony and made fun of him. Every time a teacher showed a picture of blood or organs, they waited for the thump of Tony hitting the floor. He always fainted very dramatically. Eventually, Tony stopped fainting so much. He would only faint once a week, and then once a month. Finally, he could make it through a whole year without fainting. He was no longer squeamish, and actually, he became a very good doctor. So Tony lived his whole life saying yes. He played games he didn't want to play. He ate food he didn't want to eat, he did a job he didn't want to do, and sometimes he ended up in a hospital in Kazakhstan. Or watching a really boring film with Miranda while she talked about her boyfriend's spotty back. Sometimes, Tony lay awake at night, wondering why he always said yes to everyone. It was like his body couldn't say no. He must have said it when he was a child, surely. But he couldn't remember. If he had ever said the word, something had changed, and now the word was locked away, deep inside of him. But one day, someone asked Tony something that he simply couldn't say yes to. "Tony, will you marry me?" It was Miranda. Miranda was asking him to marry her. Miranda, the friend who had almost got him killed in Kazakhstan. Tony couldn't believe it. After the horse-riding holiday, they hadn't spoken for a long time. Tony thought their friendship was over, and he was happy about this. But eventually, Miranda had asked Tony if he wanted to go bowling. Tony hated bowling. But of course he said yes, and their friendship started up again. But still, marriage. Tony and Miranda were just friends. Although there was that one time. At bowling, Miranda always drank. Usually, she had one of the cheap cocktails they served at the bowling alley. Sometimes, she had beer. Over time, Tony got better at bowling, but Miranda was always terrible. He wondered if she was letting him win. Tony never drank while they played. And fortunately, Miranda never asked if he wanted a drink. She probably didn't want to pay for him. One night, Miranda got very drunk. And Tony helped her get into a taxi. Just before she got in, she turned to him and said, "Tony, do you want to kiss me?" "Ah, yes," said Tony, hating himself. And she kissed him. Actually, for a drunk person, it was quite a nice kiss. But then she vomited inside the taxi and got in. That was not so nice. And now, Miranda was asking if he wanted to marry her. She didn't take him on holiday to the mountains, or take him to a romantic dinner. No, she had walked right into his office while he was working and asked him. Tony stayed quiet for a very long time. The word was in there. The word began with an N. At first, the word sat in his stomach. He felt sick. He wasn't sure which end of his body the word was going to come out of. But slowly, the word climbed out of his stomach, up his throat and into his mouth. It sat on his tongue, and finally, it came out of his lips. "No," he said, like he was tasting a strange food for the first time. The word burned his mouth like a spicy curry. "No," said Miranda. For a moment, he thought that this was the end. This was how he would die. This strange woman would kill him in his own office. Oh, thank God, she said, sitting down in the chair next to him. Huh. I was so worried you would say yes. Us getting married would be a terrible idea. But I seem to love terrible ideas. Tony, I'm so lonely. Every boyfriend I've had has been horrible. I only asked you to marry me because you always say yes to everything. I don't understand. Saying no wouldn't kill you. She held her head in her hands. You've done so much for me over the years. You've almost died for me. Why do you always say yes? Tony's eyes opened wide. He didn't know how to answer that question. Nobody had ever asked him before. It was probably because they liked him saying yes. It made things easier for them. Well, he said slowly. When I was a child, my mother asked me if I wanted to go swimming with her. It was strange. We never did things together. I always liked my father more. I said no. I didn't like the chlorine in the swimming pool. The next day, she was gone. He coughed. Sorry. She left us and never came back. So I learned that it's better to never say no. Is that true? Said Miranda. Didn't I meet your mother? Tony smiled. Yeah, you're right. I just made it up. He coughed again. God, the air in this place is terrible. Look, Miranda, I really don't know why I always say yes. I think I was just born that way. Tony thought back on his life. Yes, he'd had to do lots of things he didn't want to. But he'd grown a lot from it. He used to hate salmon, but now he loved it. And as a doctor, he knew how healthy it was. He often hurt himself playing football with his friends, but it had made him tough. And now he played squash several times a week. He'd hated giving those speeches in front of his class, but now he regularly spoke at medical conferences. And people told him he was an excellent speaker. And although he had to faint 1,000 times before becoming a doctor, he'd had a successful career. And he loved working with his patients. Still, he was in his 40s. He had a house he didn't want, because the estate agent had asked if he wanted it. He was single. Every time he tried to date someone, another person came along, and of course, he said yes to all of them, which meant they all got angry and left him. And although he'd had a good life, if someone asked him, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life?" he wouldn't know what to say. "Don't you think it's time to change?" said Miranda. "Isn't it time to start saying no?" "Ah, yes," said Tony. "Yes, it is." "Ah, I see the problem. All right, let's try it out. Do you want to go bowling tonight?" Tony took a deep breath. Why, no. It was a strange feeling. It felt like his body was a horse, running free through Kazakhstan. "Do you want to go get a drink?" "I'll pay." "No." Tony's eyes hurt, and he couldn't feel his fingers. "Do you want to marry me?" "Hell no." Tony stood up. His head hurt. His stomach danced. He started seeing black. "Good," shouted Miranda, jumping out of her chair. "You're learning. How does it feel?" "It feels," and then, Tony fainted. 3 days later, Tony woke up in hospital. He felt terrible. He was covered with red spots and he was unable to breathe. "Where am I?" said Tony. This wasn't a British hospital. Everything looked different. People were speaking a different language. And there was a strange smell coming from the window. The smell made his head hurt. "You are in Kazakhstan," said the nurse. "Ah. Kazakhstan." Then the doctor came into the room. "Yes, Kazakhstan," said the doctor. "My name is Dr. Tsoi. Your friend paid for your flight. She knew about us because she visited us when she was horse riding a few years ago. We are the only place in the world that can treat your condition." "What is it?" said Tony. Dr. Tsoi sighed. "Only 9 other people in the world have this condition, you're number 10. You're allergic to saying no. This is a serious allergy. I said that only 9 other people in the world have it. Well, 7 of them have died from it. And they died young. You're lucky to have lived this long. But if you ever say no again, even one time, you could die." There was only one thing Tony wanted to say: "Oh no." But fortunately, before he could speak, the doctor continued. "It's strange. Some people say it's all in the head. So it's possible you could learn to say no without hurting yourself." Well, I don't agree with those doctors. They are stupid. Have you met that Dr. Khan? I hate that man. He would tell you to keep saying no until you felt better. Pa. Stupid man with his stupid hospital. Better to just keep saying yes. Now, you must be hungry. Do you want something to eat? Yes, said Tony. Please. Dr. Tsoi smiled. Our hospital has very good food. Zarina, bring in the horse meat. Yes, doctor, said the nurse. Wait, what? The doctor was already leaving. He stopped and turned around. Don't worry. We do excellent horse meat here. Zarina came back into the room, carrying a big plate of horse meat. Here you go. She put it in front of him. Tony gulped. He felt new spots appearing on his body. He felt like spiders were climbing into his mouth. No. Entire horses were climbing into his mouth. Are you okay? Said Zarina. Yes. Are you hungry? Yes. Are you going to eat your horse meat? Tony started to cry. Yes. And, unable to stop, he began his last meal. The end.